And I'm about to hear from Dave Robinson of Stiff Records, Home to Madness, The Pogues, Kirsty MacColl and Elvis Costello. Elvis Costello, Watching the Detectives here on BBC Radio Scotland, and I am playing that because next up this afternoon I am joined by a man who started out as a photographer in the 1960s before touring with Jimi Hendrix, flat sharing with Van Morrison, opening legendary London venue The Hope and Anchor, and then launching independent record label Stiff in the mid-1970s. He signed and later directed music videos for Madness. He welcomed artists like Devo, Reckless Eric, Lena Lovitch and Motorhead onto his label, and he launched punk as we know it with The Damned's New Rose. He is Dave Robbo Robinson, and he's in Scotland this week to celebrate some of his wild tales, and his wonderful songs are those that have soundtracked his life. He is in Edinburgh tonight, he's in Paisley tomorrow, and I caught up with him earlier. Having worked with everyone from Frankie Miller to Nick Lowe, Ian Dury, Kirsty MacColl and Elvis Costello, I started by asking Dave what attracted him to particular artists. Was it their live dynamic, their songs, their ideas, or was it all of that and then some?
I think it was the songs to begin with. I identified at a very early stage that songwriters were the essence of it all. My idea was that if they wrote songs, they had the ammunition, they had their own material that you could bring on. And so you didn't have the extra argument of trying to convince your client, your musicians, to do songs that they hadn't written. Jimmy was a very good songwriter, but he didn't like his voice, which meant that he didn't perhaps fulfill as many of the songwriting slots as he could have. He was a very good and interesting guy, of course, played guitar unbelievably like no one else. He always had a guitar in his hand. It was always, if it was the guitar, he picked it up. So he liked guitars and blonde women. Okay. And in that, pretty much in that 1 and 2 there.
In that order. But the song is the thing from very early on for you. That was one of the things that galvanised your interest. I have to ask you, Dave, about your time with our very own Frankie Miller. You produced his 1973 album Once in a Blue Moon. What was it like working with that man and that voice?
He had a great voice. I actually saw him in a pub called the Tally Ho in Kentish Town. There was a band there playing called Eggs Over Easy, and I had identified that this group were really, at that time, they were a very interesting band, and they were very good players. There was a four-piece. So I knew them quite well. I'd been to see them a couple of times, and I'm buying a couple of pints for them at the bar, which is, so I have my back to the stage, when this incredible voice came out of the blue. And I thought, that's interesting because I hadn't heard any of them sound like that. I turned around quickly and there was nobody singing at the microphone. Or was there anybody else? The four-piece were playing, turned back to get my pints, and this voice came again. I turned around, nobody there. So eventually, obviously, I walked over there and found Frankie Miller in a heap on the floor. he had managed to climb up to do a couple of lines of the song, but he'd obviously been entertaining from an earlier hour. And so I thought this guy is something else. Went to his record company, Chrysalis, and said, what are you doing with this Frankie Miller? And they weren't doing anything. He had been, he'd annoying people in their office quite a bit, but they hadn't found an album for him to make. And I said, we'll do it. What a voice. What an incredible voice. He was a difficult lad in a lot of ways, but the voice was marvellous. And he wrote some great songs, Sailing, and got covers from various people.
Quite. Can you tell us a bit about how your involvement in the production and the management of bands and the pub rock scene evolved into something more tangible, like Stiff Records? So we're getting to 75, 76 by now, I guess.
I really had an aversion to the major record companies on one hand and their attitude of serving us up music in, velvet clothes and funny haircuts and high-heeled boots. I thought the good music would happen by itself. It didn't need all that stupid carry on. Having found Eggs Over Easy, having managed Brinsley Schwarz, and having an attitude of short songs, snappy, no big long guitar solos, no particular haircuts, no oil paintings among them. I looked for a place where these bands could play because they didn't have any money, they didn't have any interest from record companies, but I thought they were very, very good. So the pubs were the obvious thing because at that time, most pubs had a kind of alcoholic jazz ensemble there. And if you went in, it usually was half the room were asleep and the other half weren't in any great shape either. So, I went and the great word is, give me your worst night and I'll turn it around for you. So that's how it happened. And I did eventually book 36 pubs with people who could play in London 4 or 5 nights a week. And it became very successful. And on top of that, I did note who was good and who was going to be good and who could be good with somebody else. So I was kind of performing a kind of a record company in my mind before Stiff started.
And by 1976, you had released what is considered to be the firing gun for punk music, The Damned's New Rose. With a track like that, was there any sense at the time that it would make such huge shockwaves? It still does to this day. I got a new rose, I got a good gas, I knew that. I got a brand new rose in town.
They were good. The Damned were great players. The Sex Pistols actually, in a lot of cases, became great players. Originally, they were Malcolm McLaren's kind of plaything, but Johnny Rotten he's a very interesting, very intellectual guy, and an awful lot of the punk people were. They all had angles, but a lot of them got a chance to play, and this was the only chance you were going to get. There wasn't a long build-up or rehearsal before the bands, were on the street playing. We decided to be the first. Stiff Records were not hard, but were fast. And so we put the very first punk single out because the punks everywhere in London, and they were creeping in generally, but there wasn't any record. There wasn't anything for them to get excited about. And we also, The Damned did the first album as well. So we were ahead of the game, and that was part of Stiff's kind of ethos.
You were also releasing records by artists who sounded like absolutely no one else, and I'd argue they still sound like no one else. I'm speaking particularly about Ian Dury. You had your first number one with Stiff Records with Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick. When you saw it, do you remember when you first saw Ian Dury performing or just in real life?
I did see him performing in a club called Speakeasy, and which was a club, kind of a members club for musicians mainly, kind of the wealthier end of the musicians, because it's quite expensive down there to eat or to drink. And I saw this group playing a very odd music, a very odd kind of rhythm, which I hadn't come across. And when I looked at them, and they left the stage pretty soon after I kind of noticed them, you had Ian Dury, who unfortunately was... he had polio at 9 and his body was fairly difficult to move along. The drummer had crutches and he seemed to be having motivation difficulties. But some of the songs were really great and I followed them home. They lived in Tring and I literally followed them home because I thought this is a very exciting, very interesting collection.
Your rhythm stick, hit me,
Hit Me Rhythm Stick didn't surface for quite a while. There was quite another set of tunes. He really liked a bit of reggae and eventually met this band called Loving Awareness, who eventually became the Blockheads.
Yeah.
And Chaz liked a kind of a light funk kind of groove, which joined to Ian's lyrics became what everybody talks about.
There's a lovely sense of continuity throughout so many of the records and throughout so much of your story and the Stiff Records story. So we have someone like Elvis Costello on the books, and he, I believe, was a roadie back in the day for Brinsley Swartz. Or we have a song like They Don't Know, which Kirsty MacColl issued. I think that was her debut on Stiff Records. And am I right in thinking that later, when Tracy Ullman reissued that song and covered it, you directed the video?
Yes, I got into the videos early, and as a small company, we couldn't afford the prices of the would-be directors who wanted to go to Hollywood and use your money to get there. So we had to I had to learn how to make them. And the joy of the videos on Stiff is that they were all of them made in one day. So that was the kind of criteria, because I was trying to run a record company and there was a lot of other chores, obviously, to do. So learning to do those kind of things, having been a photographer, I could look through the camera a bit, and everybody enjoyed doing it. You'll find the entire staff of Stiff on a lot of videos. You'll find other group members in other people's videos. There was a family feeling. We were on against the major record companies were something to aim at. And I think that a lot of those tracks and a lot of those videos and a lot of these shows, which we do on the show, obviously, they are a bit timeless and they stand up well.
Yeah, it comes back to the song being strong and resilient, and the thing that's always inspired you. In the 1980s, you also became involved with Island Records, Dave, and that meant that you were embroiled in Frankie Goes to Hollywood's Relax. I think even now, there are very few songs which compare to that in the history of popular music, really, in terms of the headlines it made and the impact it had.
Yes, well, Frankie Goes to Hollywood is a script you couldn't write. As a record company kind of person, I'm obviously interested in the idea of marketing the music that you're making. And that's been some of the great stories of Stiff, is how we infiltrated and double-crossed the majors. And also trying to get stuff on BBC was very difficult if you were a small record company. But nobody could imagine that Mike Reid, in playing this track, Relax, was going to throw it at the wall and say, I'm not playing this, it's terrible. I said, well, the least then you can do is explain to the press, because I can't, why you would do that. You've been playing it for 3 months and now you're going to ban it. So he said, okay. So we had 170 people turn up in the afternoon for Ted to tell them what the record was all about. And after that, we couldn't press enough.
What's it like, Dave, when you take these stories and these songs on the road? Does everyone want to share their own connections to Stiff and to you?
Yeah, it's been very good, because we have a video pretty much about every record that we're talking about, every career that we talk about, insofar as most of the Stiff people who are still with us are out playing live. So you have Nick Lowe and you have Elvis Costello. The Damned are doing very well. Madness are doing great. And so remarkably, their music sticks with us. People like the stories. They like looking at the videos. And then we have a great question and answer. It usually runs about 45 minutes at the end. And I'm really looking forward to getting up to Scotland and trying it out up there.
Oh, well, listen, we can't wait either. It's really, really lovely to speak to you, Dave, and to re-inhabit some of those incredible songs. I just love that story of you following Ian Dury home. That's what music can do. It's lovely to speak to you, Dave. Safe travels up here.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Oh, there you go. Dave Robbo Robinson of Stiff Records and the rest talking to me earlier. And yeah, he's en route as we speak. You can catch Dave talking about his career, about his music, those songs, those stories and loads more at Edinburgh's Leith Depot tonight and Rock and Rollers in Paisley tomorrow.